Hello everybody, and welcome to our discussion. Today we have much to talk about. In general, it's going to be about the future of education. What schools of the future will look like. Will they look much different than today? In some ways yes, in some ways no. What we do know is that it's not going to be a revolutionary change. It's going to be more evolutionary or incremental. Why no revolutionary change? Schools aren't intended to change very much. In fact, education or politics isn't intended to change very much at all. If you change much, you could make a mistake. And the public sector, those who work in the government, don't like to change too much because they don't want to make a mistake. You're more likely to make news by making a mistake than necessarily making something better. So it's going to be an incremental change in education, and the schools will look somewhat different in the future. Second thing we know, besides that schools won't change very much, is that the world is going to change tremendously. So on one hand, you have a world that's going to look much different in even 3 years from now than it is today. But you have an educational system that's not going to look much different in 10 years than it works now. That means that the values that we receive from education, the value in general that we get from the education, is not going to rise appreciably unless there's some substantive changes within education. Again, it's not built for revolutionary change. It's built for evolutionary change because, in many ways, there's just too many players or actors involved in education. From the government, and that could be from the governor of a state, the city council, parents, teachers, students, administrators. The list does go on and on. That's not even counting students. In K through 12, students really don't have much say in what they're learning. That's part of the problem. But you certainly do need, if the world is going to change appreciably in the next year, 3 years, 5 years, and certainly 10, if the world's going to change appreciably, we need that those who are going to help change that world, those who are going to have to live in that world, have to be prepared to survive, if not thrive. Is that going to happen? It will if we rebuild and build an educational system at the same pace as the world's moving, which means that we need draconian and dramatic changes on a continual and consistent basis. The last couple of years indicate it's not going to happen. But here's some strategies that we should be paying attention to. These are some tactics that we need to keep at the forefront of our mind if we're going to create and sustain an educational system that's going to allow its people, not only its students, but its future graduates, the ability to compete in a much different world, one that requires different knowledges and skills that you had 3, 5, 10 years ago. First is the basics. No matter what and in what areas the world's going to change, there's certain basics that are going to hold true. Certainly reading, certainly writing. We're also talking about basic math and statistics, some engineering, geometry. Those basics, no matter what the world revolves and delves into, you're going to have those basics in order to just participate in that type of world. So schools in general have to have a renewed basis on teaching the basics. It hasn't really happened in the last couple of years. In fact, schools are teaching many more different courses that fall outside the basics, from professionalism, from learning to get into college. Those are aspects that, while certainly are meritorious, and certainly not the most important if you don't have a basics or a foundation upon which to apply those to. Basics is really important, and the school of the future is going to have a renewed emphasis on basics. Often the most amateur or neglected aspect, it's almost to be expected that any school teaches the basics. Maybe that's why they're not being taught in the same manner and with the same focus that they were 20 and 40 years ago. Second is spending money, and spending money wisely. There's going to be less and less money in education within the future, and part of that is related. There's simply not enough tax base or tax monies. The educational system and those in the educational systems are growing too rapidly, and the monies to sustain it just simply aren't appearing. Public school teachers and administrators are being paid at an exorbitantly high rate. The benefits alone, when combined with salaries, make it quite high. The level of administrators they mount is growing rapidly as well. There's quite a bit of money in education, and statistically, and when you look at the ratios, less of that money is actually making it into the classroom. So we're not spending money as wisely as we should. We don't spend money wisely, the product or the service that you're creating is not going to be as effective and as impactful as it can. So the school of the future is going to have to spend money much more wisely. That's something that government in general is not as good at doing in the private sector. If the private sector doesn't spend their money wisely, they can go out of business. Not so in the public sector, and specifically within education. 3. The third aspect of the school or the educational system of the future is going to be technology-laden. You only have to look at the number of tools that the average student is bringing into the classroom to know that it's not just mastering the current technology, but quickly adapting to the technology of tomorrow. Today's Snapchat is tomorrow's MySpace. As soon as young people learn a tool, an app, they're off to the next one. Many think that Facebook is on the downward spiral. In fact, we see that most of adults don't use Facebook. It's quite a change from even a couple of years ago. And we're seeing fewer of our younger people using Facebook. Instead, they're using Instagram. That's one reason why Facebook bought Instagram. There's also WhatsApp, another very popular app that Facebook bought, because they know that their app, Facebook, is not as successful as it used to be. The great highs of yesterday are becoming somewhat the lowers of today. Education has to realize that in relation to technology, and therefore they have to be at the forefront of the technology movement. It does mean that teachers, even teachers teaching basic skills, have to have a solid understanding of technology. It's not good enough to hire an IT professional in school and expect them to be able to know what technology to teach. Each and every teacher has to know how their industry, how their subject matter is being influenced by the environment, by industry. Then they have to adapt what they're teaching to the future. And lastly, imagination and creativity. What we will see, and it is the dominant role and focus of education in the future, those best schools of the future, the schools that have to adapt to the future, are going to be those that can teach imagination and creativity. The single sole, most important aspect that a person can develop to make them successful in their future, without a doubt, in my opinion, is the ability to train your mind to be more creative and innovative. It is the only differentiating characteristic that you have as a person against anybody else. If we in education can develop the imagination and creativity within each student, we have a chance of graduating people who are going to be able to not just sustain a changing, evolving, and dramatic world, but actually thriving and succeeding in one that's going to reinvent itself every 2 to 5 years. So that is education in the future. That's the school of the future. One that relies on the basics, that spends money wisely. Yes, that it involves technology. And lastly, teaches students in a creative and innovative manner. Those schools that can do that are certainly going to be successful. More importantly, the students who go to these schools are going to be able to adapt and readapt to a future not of their choosing, but one in which they can choose to be successful. Enjoy the day, everybody.